2 Octobers ago, I combined a weak colony into a strong one and killed them both. The weak one had been small all autumn, and I had run out of season to fix it. So I did what everybody does. Sheet of newspaper, weak box on top, walk away. A week later, the paper was chewed through and the bees had merged. By February, the whole thing was dead, and I stood there looking at a hive that had gone into winter with 12 frames of bees and came out with none. The paper had worked perfectly. Everything after the paper had been wrong. I had noticed it was small in August and told myself I would deal with it. I noticed again in September and did nothing. By the time I acted, the decision had made itself, and I was not choosing between options, I was tidying up. That is how most bad combines happen, and I have made the same mistake since in smaller ways. 12 frames of bees is not a small thing to look at when they are all dead. The paper is the easy part, and it is the only part anybody teaches. Slit it, lay it down, stack the boxes, come back in a week. That is genuinely most of what gets said about combining, and it is all correct. And it is almost none of what determines whether the combine was a good idea. Every hard question sits upstream of the newspaper. Which colonies, in what state, at what point in the season, and whether the thing you are about to merge into a healthy colony is going to travel with it. If this biology first breakdown is useful to you, a like helps more beekeepers find it. I had read about combining a dozen times before that October, and every account I had seen was about the paper. None of them had asked me a single question about the colony I was about to move. The gap between what gets taught and what actually decides the outcome is unusually wide with this one, and it took losing 12 frames of bees for me to notice it. Before anything else, here is the question I now ask before I so much as pick up a newspaper, and it takes one inspection to answer. Not, is this colony weak? Why is this colony weak? Pull frames and look for the cause rather than the symptom. Do a mite count. Look at the brood pattern. Check whether there are eggs. Look for sunken or perforated cappings or anything that smells wrong. A colony is not a colony. It is a colony with a history, and the history is what you are about to pour into a hive that currently does not have one. The 20 minutes that inspection takes is the whole difference between the two outcomes in this video. I did not spend it that October because the colony was small and quiet, and there seemed to be nothing to find, which is exactly what a mite-loaded colony in late autumn looks like from the outside. Small and quiet is not a diagnosis. It is the thing you notice before you go and find out what is actually happening. A wash or a sugar roll on 300 bees takes about 5 minutes and gives you a number instead of an impression. And in autumn, the widely used action threshold is around 3 mites per 100 bees. Everything else on that list is visual and takes as long as it takes to hold 4 frames up to the light. Before we go further, one small and genuine request. If this is useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps. It signals that careful, historically grounded beekeeping is worth showing to more people. In the comments, it would be good to know, have you ever combined 2 hives and lost both? And if you would like to support the work more directly, joining the channel is a little like buying us a coffee. No grand promises, just a way to help keep these breakdowns coming. That is all. Now, back to the bees. The answers to that one usually come with a story attached. Take the mechanics quickly, because they deserve about 90 seconds. Bees identify their own colony by scent, and 2 groups of unrelated bees put together suddenly will fight. A sheet of newspaper between the boxes stops that from happening at once. Over a day or two, the bees chew through it from both sides, and by the time they meet, the hive odors have merged and there is nothing to fight about. That is the whole mechanism. 2 or 3 thicknesses, if brace comb, might puncture a single sheet. A few small slits or none at all, weak colony on top, and leave them a week. I use 2 or 3 sheets rather than one, mostly because I have punctured a single sheet on brace comb more than once and watched the two groups meet immediately, which is a noisy few minutes and not something you want to be standing over. Beyond that, the paper does not need managing. It does the job, or the job was never the problem. Everything else about the paper is preference, and none of it is where this goes wrong. 2 or 3 thicknesses, a few short slits or none, weaker colony on top, close it up and leave it. Written out, it takes longer to read than to do. That works. It has always worked. It is not where anybody's colonies are being lost, and every minute spent perfecting the slit pattern is a minute not spent on the question that actually decides the outcome. I have never lost a colony because of a newspaper. I have lost them because of what I put on either side of it. The technique is a solved problem, and has been for as long as anyone has been writing beekeeping books. What is not solved, and what nobody puts in the instructions, is everything that happens in the 20 minutes before you tear the first sheet. What loses colonies is the question I did not ask that October, and it is the only one that matters. Why is the weak colony weak? Not whether it is weak, you can see that from the entrance. Why? There are 3 answers. They lead to 3 completely different decisions, and treating them as a single situation labeled weak hive is how a beekeeper turns one dying colony into 2. I have asked it properly since, and the answer has changed my decision more often than not, sometimes from combine to do not combine, and sometimes the other way, from nurse it along to merge it this afternoon. The first answer is disease or parasites, and this is the one that cost me. A colony that is small because it is carrying a heavy mite load or a brood disease does not become healthy by being poured into a strong colony. It becomes a delivery mechanism. The strong colony inherits every mite and every pathogen along with the bees, and now, instead of one compromised hive, you have one large compromised hive, which is worse because it had a genuine chance before you helped. The rule is blunt, and I wish somebody had put it to me plainly. A colony that is small or weak because it has disease or parasite problems will just turn those problems into a new, bigger problem. Fix those issues first, before uniting. That was my October colony. When I finally looked properly the following spring at the frames I had merged in, the evidence was all over them, and had been all over them in autumn if I had pulled a single one. I had moved a mite population into a hive that had been managing its own perfectly well, at the exact point in the year when that hive was making the bees it needed to survive until March. The frames themselves are the record. Sunken cappings, perforations, a brood pattern that has gone from solid to scattered. All of it was there, and all of it was findable, and none of it announces itself from 10 feet away in October. What a heavy autumn mite load actually looks like on the frame is undramatic, which is the problem. Not a hive crawling with mites, a brood pattern that has quietly gone patchy. A handful of bees with shriveled or crumpled wings on the top bars. Cappings that look slightly sunken or have small holes chewed in them. Any one of those on its own means very little. All 3 on the same frame in October is a colony telling you not to move it anywhere. The second answer is a queen problem. And this is the situation newspaper combining actually exists for. A colony that is dwindling because it went queenless, or has a failing queen, or has laying workers, is not carrying anything infectious. It has bees, comb, and stores, and no future of its own. United into a queen-right colony, it contributes all 3 to something that will survive the winter, rather than consuming its own stores through autumn and dying anyway. This is the textbook case, and it is the one where combining is unambiguously the right call. This is also the case where waiting has the highest cost, because a queenless colony is not going to improve on its own, and every week it stands is a week of stores eaten for nothing. The bees are still good bees. They are just in a box with no future. and moving them is the only thing that converts them back into something useful. I combined a queenless colony in early September a few years ago that brought 5 frames of bees and 11 kilos of stores into a hive that was slightly short of both. That colony came through winter noticeably stronger than it would have alone, and the queenless one was going to be dead by Christmas regardless. That is what the technique is for, and it works exactly as advertised when the diagnosis is right. The 11 kilos in particular is worth noticing, because a queenless colony that has been sitting for a month has usually eaten a good deal of that, and the window for capturing it closes quietly. The third answer is that the colony is simply behind. A late split, a swarm caught in August, a nucleus that never built. Nothing is wrong with it, it just ran out of calendar. Here the decision is about time rather than health. Can this colony reach a viable winter population from where it is now, in your climate, with the weeks remaining? If yes, feed it and leave it alone. If no, combine it while it still has something to contribute, because a small, healthy colony in September is worth considerably more to a union than the same colony in November after it has eaten most of its stores. The honest test is whether you can name the population you expect it to reach and the date it needs to reach it by. If you cannot say those two things out loud, you are not managing the colony. You are hoping at it. And hoping is what I did with the nucleus I am about to describe. A late swarm caught in the first week of August is a different proposition from the same swarm caught in the first week of September. And the difference is not the bees. It is the calendar behind them. The arithmetic is not complicated, and it is worth doing out loud rather than in the back of your mind. Count the frames actually covered in bees, not the frames in the box. Decide what a wintering colony looks like where you keep bees. For most temperate climates, that is a cluster filling something in the region of 5 to 7 frames going into the cold, and you will know your own number better than I do. Then count the weeks of real brood rearing left before the queen shuts down. If the gap between those numbers cannot be closed by the bees themselves, feeding it harder does not close it either. I learned that one the slow way, with a nucleus I could not let go of. It had a good young queen and about 4 frames of bees in early September, and every time I looked at it, I decided to give it another fortnight. I fed it. I gave it a frame of emerging brood from a strong hive in the same yard. In late October, it was still 4 frames, and I finally combined it, by which point it brought almost nothing into the union except a queen I then had to kill. The strong colony I merged it into was slightly weaker for the disturbance. If I had combined in the first week of September, I would have gained 4 frames of bees at the point when winter bees were being made. Waiting cost me the entire value of the colony, and I was congratulating myself on patience the whole time. What makes that story worse is that I knew the arithmetic the whole time. 4 frames in early September with 6 weeks of season left is a colony that reaches perhaps 5 frames if everything goes right. 5 frames is not a wintering colony in my climate, and I knew it in September. I spent 6 weeks proving something I could have worked out in an afternoon. I still have the queen from that nucleus in my memory as a good queen, which tells you how attached a beekeeper gets to a decision he has already made. That is the timing argument, and it is worth stating in its harshest form. The value of a weak colony to a combine falls every week of autumn. Bees die and are not replaced, stores get eaten, and the winter generation that should have been produced does not get produced. A combine in early September merges 2 populations while both are still making winter bees. The same combine in November merges a strong colony with a box of tired bees and some empty comb. Standard practice among people who do this well is to take your winter hive count losses in the fall, deliberately, early, while the losses are still worth something. Every autumn since I have made myself write down, in the first week of September, which colonies I expect to combine. Not which ones I might, which ones I expect to. It is uncomfortable to write in September, and it has saved me the October version of that decision every year I have done it. The list is short every year, usually 1 or 2 colonies out of a yard, and writing it in September rather than discovering it in November is the entire difference. Which reframes the whole thing. Combining is not a rescue, and it is not an admission of defeat. It is a decision about where to put your resources while those resources still have value, and the value is falling every week you wait to decide. A weak colony in September is an asset you can still spend. The same colony in November is a bill you have already paid. The colony does not care which side of that you decide on. It only notices the date. Every beekeeper I know who combines well combines earlier than feels comfortable, and every one of us who has lost a pair did it in the last fortnight of the season when there was nothing left to work with. Now the part where honest beekeepers disagree, and it is worth knowing that they do rather than being handed one answer as if it were settled. Which colony goes on top? There are 3 separate pieces of advice in circulation. The queen-right colony should be on the bottom. The weaker colony should go on top. And the colony that is being moved should go on top. Most of the time, those point the same direction, which is why nobody notices the conflict. When they do not, the reasoning I find most convincing is that putting the weaker colony on top stops the foragers from the strong hive returning in force and overwhelming the smaller group, and that putting the moved colony on top makes its foragers negotiate the bottom box and reorient to the new location. Where I have landed, after doing it both ways, is that the difference is small enough that it is not worth agonizing over, and that the one arrangement I would actively avoid is putting a large, strong colony on top of a small, weak one, which is the configuration most likely to produce a one-sided fight if the paper fails early. Being handed one confident answer on a question where practitioners genuinely differ is how a beekeeper ends up trusting a rule instead of understanding a situation. If you are moving a colony from another site, rather than merging 2 hives already standing side by side, that consideration outranks the others, and the moved colony goes on top. The second disagreement is about the queens, and it is sharper. Standard advice is to find and kill the queen in the less desirable colony before combining. The counter-argument, which I have come round to, is that leaving both and allowing the bees to choose usually produces the younger and fitter queen, and that there may be qualities in a queen that the bees can assess and the beekeeper cannot. I have done it both ways. Killing a queen you have decided is inferior is a decision made on limited information. Leaving them both is a decision to trust an assessment being made by 20,000 bees who have more data than you do. The one time I would still kill a queen deliberately is when I know something specific about her, that she is 2 years old and the other is this season, or that her brood pattern was poor before the colony dwindled. A decision made on evidence is different from a decision made because the instructions said to pick one. Leaving both queens does mean accepting that you will not know for a week which one survived, and some beekeepers find that genuinely uncomfortable. That is a preference rather than a technical objection. The slits are the part everyone argues about, and the part that matters least. The usual instruction is to cut a few small holes so the scent passes through faster. The counterposition is that no holes are necessary at all, and that great gashes torn with a hive tool are actively harmful because they let the 2 groups meet before the odors have merged. What I would take from that is the direction rather than the detail. Err toward fewer and smaller openings. Use 2 or 3 thicknesses of paper if there is brace comb that might puncture a single sheet, and stop worrying about it. The version of this I now use is 2 sheets, 3 or 4 short slits made with a knife rather than a hive tool, and no further thought. In 20-odd combines done that way, I have not had one go wrong for reasons that had anything to do with the paper. The reason it gets so much attention is that it is the only part of the process a beginner can control precisely, and precision is comforting when the actual decision is uncomfortable. There are 3 things I would put a genuine caution on and then stop qualifying. Do not combine into your best colony if there is any doubt at all about the weak one. Use a middling colony, so a mistake costs you less. Do not combine in the middle of swarm season, because 2 colonies merged in May frequently decide to leave. And do not combine 2 colonies that are both weak for reasons you have not identified, because 2 unknowns merged together produce one larger unknown rather than an answer. I use a middling colony as the recipient now as a standing rule, and it came directly from that October. If the merge goes wrong, I lose a colony I could afford to lose rather than the best hive in the yard. 3 cautions, and then I am done qualifying, because the rest of this is straightforward, and hedging it further would only make it harder to act on. What happens afterwards is quieter than people expect. Leave them a full week without opening anything. When you do look, the paper will be gone, and you will find scraps of chewed newspaper scattered in front of the entrance, which is the sign the merge went normally. Then consolidate. Pull the surplus frames, put brood in the bottom box and stores above, shake the bees off anything you remove, and end up with one properly organized colony rather than 2 half boxes stacked on each other. That consolidation step gets skipped constantly, and it is the difference between a combined colony and a tall, untidy one. The scraps in front of the entrance are worth looking for specifically because they are the only external confirmation you get. Paper on the landing board and on the grass in front of it means the bees worked through from both sides and merged normally. No paper visible after a week is worth opening for, because it usually means they went around rather than through, which happens if the paper did not seal to the edges of the box. I have found colonies a fortnight after a combined, still stacked in 2 boxes with brood split across both because I did not go back and sort them out. And that is a colony that then has to keep 2 brood areas warm through the first cold snap. What a failed merge looks like is also worth knowing, because it is unmistakable once seen. A scatter of dead bees on the landing board and on the floor of the hive within a day or 2 of putting the boxes together. That is the 2 groups having met before the odors merged, and it means the paper tore, or was torn, or never sealed at the edges. It is rare, and it is almost always the beekeeper rather than the bees. There is a mental hurdle in all of this that has nothing to do with technique, and it is the reason most late combines happen too late. Combining reduces your hive count, and every beekeeper feels that as a loss, even when it plainly is not. Going into winter with 4 strong colonies instead of 6 mixed ones is a better position by every measure that matters, and it will still feel like failure when you write it in the record book. I have watched myself nurse a colony for 6 weeks specifically so that I would not have to write down a smaller number, which is not a beekeeping decision at all. The record book version of this is worth being blunt about. 6 colonies in October, of which 2 are struggling, is not 6 colonies. It is 4 colonies and 2 problems, and writing it down as 6 does not change what arrives in March. I have written 6 more than once. The number in the book is not the thing that survives winter. The bees are. The sequence, then, is short, and almost all of it happens before the newspaper comes out. Find out why the weak colony is weak, with an actual inspection rather than an impression. If the answer is mites or disease, do not combine until it is fixed. If the answer is a queen problem, combine now. If the answer is that it is simply behind, decide honestly whether it can get there from here, and if it cannot, combine while it still has bees worth having. Choose a middling colony as the recipient rather than your best. Weak colony on top, paper with a few small slits or none, and then leave it alone for a week and consolidate properly when you open it. None of that takes long. The inspection is 20 minutes. The decision is immediate once you have the answer, and the combine itself is 10 minutes at dusk. The order matters more than any individual step, because every part of it after the inspection depends on what the inspection found. The inspection is the only part anyone skips, and it is the only part that changes the answer. The reason that October Combine failed was not the paper, and it was not the technique. It was that I asked whether the colony was weak and never asked why, and the answer would have taken 20 minutes to find and would have changed everything I did next. The colony I merged in had been telling me what was wrong with it since August. I had walked past it perhaps 15 times. Have you ever combined two hives and lost both, and looking back, did you know why the weak one was weak before you started? Leave your experience in the comments. Subscribe for more historically grounded beekeeping, and if you want the full breakdown of how to read whether a colony has a queen problem without tearing the hive apart, that one is next.